And welcome back. For today we're going to work on some procedural moss. You're going to have your nice rock. It's going to have its good edge textures and grunge, but we want to add moss. We're just going to add it to the top because we want to make it look like the moss is somehow sitting on the rock. It's interacting with the rock in this particular way. There are other things you can do with moss to add like streaks of it or any other way, but this is just going to be a quick way to add procedural moss to a scene. You might want to add it to the top. You could add it to the side or any other place actually, maybe the side of a tree trunk. So to start with, we've got our rock from the last episode. And we need to mask out all the vertical polygons that are pointing up, directly up. We can do that by selecting a normal from, or the normal vector output from the geometry node. So we're just going to see what that looks like by itself. I'm going to plug it into base color. So now we have this like Technicolor rock. What this is showing you is a combination of the red, green, and blue channels that Blender is interpreting the world or global normal vectors for this particular object as. So Blender is taking the normal vector and it's interpreting all three of those numbers as colors in for this particular purpose for display. So we can separate these colors by adding a separate node, separate RGB, and we're going to plug it into the path between the normal vector and the geometry normal output and the display. And this allows us to see just one vector at a time. So that would be the X. X is red. Y is green. And Z is blue, which is very convenient because that's the way that Blender color codes the coordinates for its cardinal system anyway. So now that we have the Z-axis or all of these, and that's a very quick way of masking them out, we're going to add in a moss texture. Just going to duplicate this, and I'm going to give it its own mapping coordinates because I'd like it to have its own separate scale separate from the rock texture. Yeah, and I'm going to duplicate the value here. We'll set that to 3. And now we're going to add a mix RGB so that we can mix in the moss texture. We're also going to make sure this is set to box and blend, just like the other one. I'm going to open up the moss texture itself. There we are. And we're going to go to plug one in, plug the other in, and then you plug the, gotta plug the albedo there, or the, what's it called, the mask. So now we have this mossy looking rock. It's interesting, but I mean, it's getting there. It looks pretty good, but I want to make it look a little bit more interesting or realistic. First of all, we have no control over how much of the rock is covered with moss. So we're going to change that real quick. And what we need to do is be able to influence the information coming out of this separate RGB. So I'm going to just move this over. And we're going to add a color ramp. Like this. And now we have a little bit of control. I can put more moss, less moss. So I want to see what this is doing. So Shift Control left click to preview the node. I'm going to name this so I don't forget what it is. Moss blend, and I believe this one is a grunge blend. Grunge blend, and this one is, it's lightened, so it was the scratch blend. Blend. Okay. As this one's selected, now we need what's this look like? Yeah, so looks pretty good. But I don't want it to be so smooth. Like you can see the edges, they're kind of faded. It's okay from back far, but I'd like the edges to be a little bit less faded. So to do that, I'm going to duplicate color ramp again. And I'm going to add in a noise texture. Another noise texture. I think I'm going to have to move this a bit further away. And for the sake of it, I'm going to just move these out because it's every time you drop a node in, it wants to intersect the node, and I don't want to do that. So I'm just going to move these out of the way. Like that. It's going to bother some people. There we are. So got a bit of space to work here. I want to pull the vector coordinates. I'm going to pull in from, that would be from the output here. So pull it in from the output of the noise texture because I want to keep them sort of compartmentalized. And now we're going to have another color ramp. Noise textures and color ramps go together very well. And probably move this back or down. Yeah. Color ramp goes there. So factor to factor. And now we're going to see what this is doing. Make sure it's doing something useful. You want to make it sort of look like fibers. We're going to extend it, a little more roughness, and a tiny bit of distortion. Yeah, that should be fine. Make the scale a little, not quite that large maybe. Yeah, so it's sort of clumpy moss. Okay. And we're going to want to mask this out, of course. So this one is, we're going to get another mix node, mix RGB. We're going to duplicate this because we're going to do the same one below. And we're going to use this one to here, and then this one to mask. Or multiply, I think. Either one, multiply and mask, or the factor do very similar things. Yeah, so it's just where we want it to be. This is going to be the control, or moss spread. And this is going to be moss clump. So same thing here, multiply, multiply, and this is going to go into this one actually. So we can control the spread of the moss like this. And now we want to mask in something for clump because you don't want the moss to be too uniform. It should be like more clumpy in the middle. Well, at least I want it to be more clumpy in the middle. And this was also going to be multiply. So what's this one doing? to be clumpy. Yeah, it should be working. Now we're going to add another one. And this one's going to just lighten. There. So we have the ability to control the spread of the moss itself and how far the clumps are showing up. And the moss, all the moss. So having that, we're going to take this, we're going to plug it into the factor for our moss blend. We're going to see what that looks like. All right, getting there. It's a little bit better. Have some control over the moss itself. Although you might notice the bump map for the moss is the same as the bump map for the rock. That doesn't look right. But that's fairly easy to change. We'll just mask that again. Another mix RGB. We're going to drag we're going to drag the fiber one, the masked fiber one. There it is. So we're going to drag this one into the second slot, mix, and then we'll use a factor that's not one of those. So use this one as a factor. Yeah. So like this. And this is what we end up getting. So this is the rock texture and this is the moss texture. You might want the moss to be a bit more, so we're going to add a mix RGB because it's not quite. I'm just going to mix it. Actually, let's lighten. Yeah, sort of match the color of the rest of the rock, or at least the value. And then we'll add a math node because we need to be able to adjust the bump map for. So we could do this all at once. Let's just remove that, and we're going to take this one here. I need the fibers. I'm going to go into multiply add and I want to try to match the value to the rock value. So turn this down a bit, add 0 for now, and multiply. It gives us a very bright moss, but the background of it's a little bit dim. So we're going to just adjust these sliders until we get something that's going to look good. Now I think we should look at the bump map value. And let's take off the albedo just so we can see what we're doing. So let's multiply less or more. And you can see the moss texture. It sort of has this like fibrous looking, the noise is doing a good job. I think the fibers are very sharp noise. Might be what's going on. Maybe it's inverted. Try that. Sometimes the value is inverted. Make a difference? Actually, we could just, let's just do that. I'll go up to here. No, this one. And invert the values. No? Anyway, that's pretty good. The bump value is not particularly high, but it should give us a good actually we should add this instead. Let's do that. Because we need to include the clumps in the bumps. See what the let's see what it looks like together. It's not bad. I like it. At least it doesn't have the same bump map as the rock. Let's try something else. I'm going to go up to detail here and turn the detail down a little bit. Yeah, get a little bit more visible detail going on here. It's too fine. So we'll just increase the amount. Try to get some interesting looking moss. If the bump map is too fine, too many highs and lows packed together, it doesn't show up very well. Okay, so we should have it should not be showing up the bump map quite so strong through here, because I mean it shouldn't. It's hard to see it though, often. Could clamp it, maybe that would work. Maybe that worked. Yeah, a little bit. So we're going to change the oh, multiply, that's why. There we go. What's it connected to now? Yeah. Just going to change this to 0 and see what we can get. Nothing. Oh, I know why. That is because the output of this is obscuring it. Of course it is. Yeah, you can see these like really large chunks here now. Yeah. It's pretty good looking though. I like that. So I'm gonna try this one instead because I like that look, yeah. And I'm going to mix, maybe not, maybe I'll just leave it. Because, you know, moss has a sort of a feathery look to it. Come down here, oh, multiplier again. Just move the multiplier down a little bit. 5. Yeah, real subtle like that. That looks pretty good. So to recap, now we have the ability to change the moss fiber spread. That only seems to be affecting the bump map now. And its clump. Yeah, fibers do affect. And the clump lets us add more clumps of moss. I'm gonna change that bump map down a bit. Yeah, let's change this to 1. Might give us some good texture for moss. Oh yeah, it's flattened on the top here. It's already clamped. Yeah, we're gonna take just the problem is it's already clamped. So if it's clamped, there won't be any more data, just be flat white. So that way there'll be more data. I could just change this down a tiny bit. 0.005, yeah, that looks good. And we'll see what it looks like. All right. So this is looking good. We can change the, like I said, we can change the clumpy value, we can change the spread. It's subtle, clumping value is subtle. Change the harshness of the clump. And the sort of fibrous amounts. Fibrous, some odd effect on the bump map though, doesn't it? Yeah, oh well. Have the ability to do that. So now I want to add some color diversity to this particular object. And we're going to add a hue saturation node for that. Oh, it's probably one word. Yeah, there we are. And we're going to, we need to mix this in with the color before it goes into this shader. So with this, now we can change the hue for the entire, that's the factor, that's not going to do anything. So it goes in here, there we go. Yep, so we're going to change the hue saturation value for this particular moss. We can change the hue by simply rolling this back and forth. I set the base is 5 or neutral is 5. So we're going to add a noise texture. Bring in this thing here. Add that in there. Going to add this to that. So in other words, we plug the noise texture into a color ramp. Color ramp will now plug into the hue, and we'll get a little bit of diversity. Don't need to be quite so big, or small rather. Yeah. Yeah, something like that. So this color ramp will allow us to rename this. Color. So now the hue, the spread is far too wide. So what we could do is we could go into the ramp here, and we could actually just change these, you know, to get to just the right colors we want. Or we could do something like math nodes. So we're going to add a math node, and then we're going to add another math node. And the first one is going to be a multiply. Actually, we can just use multiply add. So multiply add. The multiply will change the range of color difference, and the add will change the location it's positioned at. That's good. Now we're going to name this color range control. Good. But I'd like to have some control of what the edges of the moss look like. And for that, we're going to add something to modify this line here. So we're going to add another mix RGB, and we're going to bring in the moss spread to the factor. All right, so we already have a little bit going on. If we take this and we're going to duplicate the color ramp to give us more control of the moss edges and centers. Moss edge color. So this will give us a great deal of control over the edges and over the centers. And actually what we can do is we can add a value here, and we're going to call it, plug it in, we're going to call it edge color spread. I'll call this spread for now. And we should be able to set exactly what color we want the edge of the moss to be. And this will let us control how far out the edge should be. So you've got the center of the moss controlled by a random function over here, most of the moss, and then the edge is controlled with this value here. We could reverse it and control the center. Yeah, we're going to control the center instead. Let's do that instead. Oh, interesting. Technicolor. Oh yeah, because it's multiplying the whole thing. Yeah, there we go. So if I wanted this to be a little greener, like this, and I wanted this one to be a little more brown, that's pretty easy. Now, if we really wanted to, we could add controls for the moss color somewhere easily accessible. Like let's say we wanted to do something like this. So we'll call this one moss moss color range. Wait, what was that value? 0.31. And this one we could call moss color position. .3. Yeah, so we could also add, what you could just add this for flavor to value. And add a color ramp. Plus color value. Get the colors just right. It's a little neon green for my tastes. So I can just go up here to the center color and shift it a little bit. And if I don't want so much edge, I can change that a little bit too. There we go. So how's this looking? That looks pretty good. One other thing we can do is an interesting trick that makes the moss look, I'm going to render it out quickly to see, actually I'm going to save it first, see what we have currently. On the moss. Looks pretty good. Got the bump map going. So one other thing we could do here is we could take the moss noise, we're going to take that, we're going to add it to Subsurface. Because it'll make your rock look like a piece of wax. That's fine. We're going to take the color, hue saturation. No, actually, excuse me. We're going to take, yeah, that's correct. Like this. And we're then going to go into subsurface radius. We're going to change this to 0.3. It's right now it's keyed for skin, human skin. It's not what we're trying to make. 0.4. So it's red, green, and blue. 0.3. So now we have a little bit more subsurface going on here, but we don't want that much. So I'm going to take a math node. And I'm going to stick it on this line here. And we're going to go to multiply, of course, and we're going to change this to a very low value. So now we can change the, it's a very subtle appearance, but we can change the Yeah, it's very subtle. Oh wait, that's controlling the entire... Well, that's the noise color. We want this one here. We want the tendrils. There we go. Yeah. So now when we change it, it's only going to change the tendrils or the moss. So we can give it that slightly organic, translucent look. And we're going to render it without. See if there's any difference. There's a slight overhead for rendering time, but other than that, this is without, this is just with the moss. And now we're going to do it with the subsurface. I'm going to change it up a little bit so we can actually see it, maybe. Yeah, we're going to render that. And it's going to take a little longer. Not a lot longer, but a little longer. It has a very different look to it. It looks softer. Yeah. So we could change this even more, make it less dramatic. Try 0.08. Yeah, it looks like there's actual fuzzy moss growing on this rock. I think it's pretty good. So now we have most of everything labeled. We have a control set up here to control the variables for the moss. Hue saturation. And just double check the bump map. Again, these things can be tweaked for a very long time, but you don't need to tweak them. You don't need to watch me tweak them either. This is just a tutorial on how to get these things done. So the multiplier for the bump map, go up a little bit. Did change something. Yeah. Let's change the camera angle. And we're going to add some more moss. Yeah, that looks pretty cool. It's so cool to be able to just run a slider like this and produce moss exactly where you want it. All right, so the next thing we're going to do, and the final thing we're going to do, is just pose the rocks in a specific way. We're going to duplicate this one. Just to illustrate the ability to quickly reproduce just copy a rock, and they look very different from each other simply because you've rotated them enough. And what we did should allow you to see that they almost look like they have this contact information with each other. So I'm going to use the camera controls here. And I'm going to set the noise level for rendering a little bit lower. And we're going to render it big. Here we go. F12. And there you have it. That's moss on rocks, and this is very nice looking, pretty moss. The rock is very detailed. It looks an awful lot like, there's a couple of things with the moss. Obviously, you're not going to have it. It's a quick moss. You're not going to have it drooping off the sides, or you're not going to have it like, you know, you're not going to be able to see clumps or piles of it. You need to use some other modeling techniques to get it to do that. But from a distance, from even just a moderate distance, this will look very convincing. So in the next episode, we're going to look at the compositing system in Blender, and we're going to make a final composition and render with our rocks, and we're going to use the compositor to make the final scene look really nice. So stay tuned for that, and thanks for joining me so far.